up, y'all? Welcome back to another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Detroit Lions 2011 season. Now, the 2011 season was one of the most entertaining, interesting, and crazy seasons the Detroit Lions have ever had. And it was the start of a lot of things for the Lions. One, it was really the start of Matthew Stafford's career and the great career that he will continue to have, and he continues to have with the Detroit Lions. We're hoping for a huge year, maybe his best year in 2020, but it really all did start in 2011 was his first full season. It also was the first year the Detroit Lions became really relevant once again in the NFL, because it was the 90s since they made the playoffs, and also was going all the way back to 2000 that they even had a winning record. The Detroit Lions somehow became relevant in 2011 and kind of shocked everybody because they did sort of come out of nowhere. So today we're talking about the 2011 season, and I think it's really important to look at the 2011 season because we use the 2011 season to compare a lot of other offenses, because 2011 holds up as one of the best offenses that we've ever had in Detroit. So it's really easy to go back and compare. And even though they had a lot of injuries, they were still great offensively, and it definitely carried them to a playoff spot. So it's really easy to compare this offense to a lot of other offenses we've had. Like last year, we compared the 2019 offense to the 2011 offense because there's a lot of similarities. 2011, like most other years, we weren't really able to run the football, but we passed like crazy. And if that's not similar to all the years we've seen under Matthew Stafford, I don't know what is. So I think it's great to go back and look at the 2011 season just to get a good feel. That way when we reference it, it makes sense and we all can remember it. 2011 was actually a long time ago, and we were coming up on a decade. That is crazy. I believe 2011 was the first game I actually went to was in 2011. I don't really remember it that well. Like, I remember a little bit of it, and I remember, like, not really understanding the rules, and I thought, stuff was whatever. Either way, I think that was the first time I actually went to a game. I was only, like, 11, 12 years old, so keep that in mind. So if you guys have anything that you remember from the 2011 season specifically, comment below. And for some of the younger guys in watching these videos, maybe even younger than me, this might be perfect for you because you guys may have been, like, 5 years old, like, oh, snap, I don't remember any of this. I want to know about it. So 2011 is definitely an important year, and you should know about it. So let's get it started. So the 2011 season was Jim Schwartz's third year as the Detroit Lions head coach. In 2009, he was hired coming off the 2008 season where the Lions lost, let's just say, every single game. Yes, the Lions were 0-16 in 2008. They had a lot of problems. There was definitely a lot of problems with this team, and there's definitely some, I would say, low-light reels that you can check out on YouTube for sure. But in 2009, the Detroit Lions had to address this situation by drafting their future quarterback, the guy that is still balling out for Lions, and Matthew Stafford. So the Lions drafted Matthew Stafford in 2009. The first year for Jim Schwartz. He also hired his two coordinators, Scott Linehan and Gunther Cunningham. Okay, Scott Linehan was the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator, and rest in peace to Gunther Cunningham. He has now passed away. I believe he passed away in 2019, but he was at the time the Detroit Lions defensive coordinator. So Jim Schwartz brought in his guys in 2009. He drafted Matthew Stafford, and it looked like, hey, maybe things were up from here. There's definitely always a lot of hope when you take the top quarterback in the draft with the first pick in the draft. There's a lot of hope going into that quarterback and that team. And in 2009, we saw some improvements. In 2009, Matthew Stafford's first year, he didn't play in every game, but the Lions did win 4 games, and he only played in 10 games. So there's definitely some improvements and reasons to be optimistic. In 2010, the second year for Jim Schwartz, unfortunately, Matthew Stafford only played in 3 games. And because of this, they only won 6 games. Hold up, they won 6 games. So yes, they continued to improve, and Matthew Stafford, again, only played in 3 games. So there were definitely high hopes, hoping that, hey, can this guy just be healthy for a full season? Well, in 2011, the fans got what they wanted, and Matthew Stafford was healthy. As he played in all 16 games, plus a playoff game, Matthew Stafford had arguably, I wouldn't say the best, I think his best is to come, and that's next year, but maybe up to this point, the best season that he's ever had. Throwing for over 5,000 passing yards, 41 touchdowns, 16 interceptions, and really just throwing the ball consistently with no running game help whatsoever. Matthew Stafford led the Detroit Lions to a playoff appearance. And this playoff appearance was the first time since the 90s that the Lions were in the playoffs, and it was the first time since 2000 that they even had a winning record. So the Detroit Lions heading into the 2011 season wanted to make the run game more relevant, take some pressure off of Matthew Stafford, because that's what the run game can always do, helps out defense and the offense and the quarterback position. But unfortunately, the rushing game caught the injury bug. Like our defense did last season in 2011, the rushing game did. The Detroit Lions drafted their new running back in Michael Ashord, who got injured in preseason, and we really didn't get to see him play whatsoever. Also, Jahvid Best was injured in 2011 after a couple of weeks played, and he showed so many glimpses, nearly averaging 5 yards a carry, but unfortunately, Jahvid Best was injured, and his career would end just a year later. Unfortunately, Jahvid Best had a lot of potential, but injury history really plagued him. So Jahvid Best is down, and Michael Ashord is down, and now you're back to your depth running backs with Maurice Morris and Kevin Smith, who I would say did okay, with what they were asked, but obviously they weren't the starters for a reason. So the Lions Lions' rushing game was really nowhere to be found. And because of that, the Lions said, let's just go all in. Let's throw the football. And they had the weapons to do it, and it did work. When you have Calvin Johnson, Nate Burleson, Brandon Pettigrew, Titus Young, you know what? You could probably go to passing the ball a little bit more. But the Lions went all out. When I say they went all out, I mean they went all out. The Detroit Lions only ran the ball just about 33% of the time, which was a league low. 33% of the time. 1 out of every 3 plays he ran the football. That is absolutely crazy. And they were in the shotgun 68% of the time. 68% of their offensive snaps was out of the shotgun. That doesn't really necessarily help the running game if you're not going to run it a lot. It's just to pass the ball. They spread the guys out and they just let their playmakers make plays. And that was their offense. And it worked. It worked well enough to lead them to a playoff appearance. But when you look at the weapons that they had, this is why we usually go back and compare these teams to the 2011 team. When you have Calvin Johnson, who had one of the best seasons of his career, probably not the best because he did break the receiving yards record in one season, but this season was great. He played in 16 games for over 1,600 yards receiving for 16 touchdowns. We thought Kenny Galladay had a lot last year with 11. Try 16. Now, I do want to throw this little stat out there because I think it is an interesting fact that when Matthew Stafford was healthy in his 8 games, Kenny Galladay had 7 touchdowns. So, yeah, maybe he could have 14 if Stafford was healthy all year. I thought I'd just point that out. Either way, you had Calvin Johnson, who was doing Calvin Johnson things, a young Calvin Johnson. You had Brandon Pettigrew, who was a top pick that had 83 receptions for 777 yards and 5 touchdowns. You had Nate Burleson, who is now on TV, probably people know him from there, who in this season had 73 receptions for 757 yards and 3 touchdowns. Titus Young, 48 receptions for 607 yards and 6 touchdowns. So you definitely had weapons, and that's why it's really easy to compare, these current teams to the 2011 team. So the Lions really rode on that passing attack, and they rode it all the way because the rushing attack was pretty much awful. Like, obviously there were some injuries, but they weren't even attempting that much to run the football. The Detroit Lions rarely ran the football in 2011. They just said, okay, you know what, we're just going to throw the ball. 31st in rushing attempts, so obviously, they weren't trying to run the ball too much, and they were 29th in rushing yards, averaging 4.3 yards per carry, which is actually 12th in the league. So it wasn't like they were completely awful. They just didn't really try it. They went to the pass game, and the pass game was their game. The Lions were known for passing the football. Well, how about on the defensive side? Because if the defensive side is completely off, you'd think, how is this team going to make the playoffs? Well, obviously they had to score a lot of points, and the Lions averaged a lot of points, which we'll get to in a second. But on the defensive side of the ball, the Lions defense still wasn't that great. I mean, it was good at a couple of things, which really was the difference maker, but it wasn't great overall. The Detroit Lions finished 23rd in total defensive yards allowed, 23rd in points allowed, but one thing that they did really well was forced turnovers. They were 4th in turnovers forced with 34 turnovers. They forced 34 turnovers. That is crazy. So that will definitely help, and they also were able to get a lot of pressure, totaling up 41 sacks on the season. Now, heading into this year, there was definitely a lot of high hopes for the defensive line. You had Ndamukong Suh, who in 2010 had 10 sacks from the DT position. You ran a 4-3, and they drafted Nick Fairley that year. One of your top picks was used on Nick Fairley. Instead of going Patrick Peterson, they said, we're going Nick Fairley. Now, obviously, maybe in the long run, that didn't work out. But at the time, you would have thought that, hey, you're running a 4-3. You know what? Stack the defensive line, make it the best in the league on paper. And that's kind of what they tried to do. Cliff Averill was coming off an 8.5 sack season heading into his contract year. You knew he would play well. You had Ndamukong Suh coming back. You paired him with Nick Fairley, and you brought in Kyle Van Den Bosch, who looked like he was just like right at the end of his prime, kind of like an Everson Griffin type of move. So the defensive line was pretty darn good, and they got 41 total sacks, which isn't bad. Unfortunately, we can't see how much they blitzed. We don't have the numbers for that for the 2011 season, but it was pretty darn good. Cliff Averill on his contract year did have 11 sacks. 11 sacks. So yes, he definitely wanted to get paid. He had 11 sacks. Van Den Bosch was able to total up 8 sacks. Ndamukong Suh 4 sacks, and Stephen Tolek 3 sacks. But yeah, don't forget about Lawrence Jackson, who had 4.5 sacks on the season. So the defensive line was the main part of the defense. I mean, that was really all it was. It was forcing turnovers and getting pressure with the defensive line. And they got a lot of pressure. They were also not the most liked team in the league. I mean, this team was really fun to watch because both on the offense and defensive side, they played with an attitude that you just don't see a lot. You think of a lot of teams, they play tough, but the Lions were just like, the Lions were like a bunch of just random kids you pulled together at the park, and they're just like all mean kids, and they just want to play on the same team. That's what this team looked like. Okay, they were young, they were hungry, and they played like their coach Jim Schwartz. If you ever watched Jim Schwartz on the sideline, we know this was one of the most, I would say, expressive coaches that we've ever had. One of the most outgoing coaches. This guy was absolutely crazy, kind of like the Jim Harbaugh of coaches. That was kind of like Jim Schwartz, and the team played just like that. I mean, we've seen moments. We know Ndamukong Suh was looked at as one of the nastiest players in the league for stepping on Aaron Rodgers, which, by the way, was a clean play. No, I'm kidding. It wasn't clean, but hey, that was just the attitude. I mean, that play in one sums up the attitude of what the Detroit Lions were, and that's why a lot of people liked Ndamukong Suh. I mean, that's what the Lions were defensively and offensively. We've even seen Matthew Stafford throw down a defensive player because he was frustrated. Matthew Stafford threw a pick on defense. And when a guy was trying to block him, he grabbed the dude by the helmet basically and threw him on the ground. And then there just ended up being multiple fights. Multiple fights. We obviously know the incident with Jim Schwartz and Jim Harbaugh at the end of the game. This team had an attitude, and that's what made them so fun to watch. I mean, this was not your normal team. This team did not look at all like a team that was, professional. They had tons of penalties. They were one of the most penalized teams in the NFL, defensively, offensively. We've seen players yell at other players, cussing out other players to, be professional and get their stuff together, because this team was wild. They were completely out of control, and that's probably some of the reason that Jim Schwartz didn't last very long. But it was also another reason to love him and love what he did for Detroit, because there was no lack of passion out of Jim Schwartz when we watched him as the Lions head coach. I mean, he clearly cared for his team, and you could tell when you watched the Lions that everyone was able to buy into it. That's what really is important at the end of the day, is everyone buying into and they want to play for you. And the Lions team did. Everyone bought in for Jim Schwartz. And this team was not consistent because of all the penalty issues and not being able to run the ball consistently. And penalties on top of penalties and playing like crazy, making a lot of dumb mistakes. The Lions were not a very consistent team. I mean, they would beat someone by 40 and then come back and lose by 20 the next week. That's how they were. However, the Detroit Lions did get off to one of the best starts we've ever seen in franchise history. I believe it goes back to the 50s, but the Lions started 5-0 this season with wins over Tampa Bay, who was 4-12 on the season. Okay. They beat Kansas City 48-3. When is the last time we beat a team by 45 points? I don't care who that team has on our team. The last time we beat a team by 45 points. I miss those days. I miss that. I mean, I don't care how bad they are. They were 7-9 on the season, and that was the only team that beat Green Bay that year. We beat them by 45. Man, I miss that. We beat Minnesota then 26-23. So you're telling me you beat a 7-9 team, the only team that beat the Packers, because by the way, they went 15-1. We'll get to that in a second, by 45. And then you go to overtime with Minnesota, who has Christian Ponder, who won 3 games on the year, by the way, last in the North. Then you beat the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, that's great. No, Calvin Johnson had to go off in that game. And you beat Chicago the week after to go on to a 5-0 start. So you're 5-0. You beat Chicago. You beat Kansas City. You beat the brakes off of Kansas City. You're feeling good, right? 2 divisional wins already. Week 6, you play the San Francisco 49ers, who ended up being one of the best teams in the league. I believe they were 13-3. Yes, they were 13-3 that season. And this is the game that I went to. I didn't know the line. Actually, looking back, I can't believe the Lions were 5-0 going into this game. I actually had to take it somewhere. I can't believe the Lions were 5-0 going into this game. Yes, the Lions were 5-0 going into this game, and they lost this game 25-19. So I had to go back and watch this game because I didn't remember that well. The footage is really weird on the coach's, film. But either way, I had to go back and watch this game, and we were close. We were right there. We had them in the 4th and goal with the lead. They had to score a touchdown, and they caught a slant for a touchdown. And that was it. If we would have stopped them, we would have been 6-0. We were this close. I mean, this close. That was a heartbreaker. And we lost that game to San Francisco. Then we came back and lost to Atlanta, who again, Atlanta 10-16. You lost to Atlanta, so you're 5-2. So it looks like the juice may have ran out. But you came back strong and you beat Denver. And Denver was a playoff team. You beat the brakes off of Denver, 45-10. A Tim Tebow-led Denver Broncos that he's not even in the league anymore. I don't know what the heck that was. Either way, this playoff team, you destroyed them 45-10 on the road. Then you play Chicago, who is 8-8. You get beat 37-13. I mean, there's just no consistency. You get beat by 40. You beat someone by 40. I don't understand. But then they come back. They drop 49 points on Carolina. I mean, it's crazy. This team is absolutely nuts. 49 points on Carolina. Then you play Green Bay, who went 15-1 this year. I mean, how unfortunate is that? That one of your best years, you're finally relevant. But no, the Green Bay Packers had to win every single game. The Green Bay Packers had to start 13-0 on the season or something like that. 13-0. Come on, man. That's not why. Like 12. Really? Come on, man. They didn't have to be 15-1. But yes, of course, they had to be 15-1 this season. So they're 15-1. They beat the Lions 27-15. And then you play the New Orleans Saints, so you end up playing in the wild card game later. You lose this game 31-17, but hey, the New Orleans Saints were a great team, but it was kind of foreshadowing. And then you played your next 3 games, so you're kind of on a losing streak, right? You lost 5 games to 2 wins. So in your last 7, you were 2-5, but the Lions were able to bounce back from the 7-5 record and beat Minnesota, beat Oakland, and beat San Diego, and then ultimately lose to Green Bay in their final game and finish 10-6. Didn't really matter. The Lions lost to Matt Flynn. All right. Now, you may be saying to yourself, oh, the Lions are trash. No, they're not trash. That just shows how good this Packers offense was. They scored 45 points on the Lions. We lost this game by 4. They scored 45. Stafford threw for 520 yards. The Green Bay Packers scored 45 points with a backup quarterback. This offense was ridiculous this season. And hey, Matt Flynn, he made a name for himself. Obviously, he didn't last very long, but he made a name for himself in beating the Detroit Lions in this game. So the Lions go into the playoffs 10-6, and they're going to face the wild card game against the New Orleans Saints. Now, this game at half seemed like, oh my gosh, the Lions actually may pull off the upset. I mean, the Saints were heavily favored. They were 13-3. They looked like they were going to blow out the Lions. But at halftime, the Lions led this game 14-10. I can remember dressing up for this game. They were 14-10 at half. And then in the second half, all of a sudden, the Saints became the Saints, and they scored 5 touchdowns to the Lions too. So the Lions lost this game 45-28. But even though you didn't win the playoff game, this team changed the outlook for the Lions. I mean, this changed the decade, because in 2000 to 2010, this may have been the most irrelevant team in the NFL. And all of a sudden, in 2011, you kick things off with a playoff appearance. You have one of the best offenses. I mean, you ranked top of the league in a lot of different things. I believe they averaged 29 points per game. They were one of the best offenses. Their defense wasn't good. They couldn't run the football. But this goes to show you that defensively, you don't have to be great to be successful. And this is why I can say over and over, we don't need the best defense. We just need to be average, and we can be successful. I mean, this team was not perfect. They were not pretty. They were not professional. But they got it done, and they won games. And the first full year for Matthew Stafford, one of the best seasons ever. Okay, at the time, only 4 quarterbacks threw for 5,000 passing yards. Ridiculous numbers that Stafford put up. And it's just a crazy year to go back and look on. So now you know about the 2011 season. And when we go back and when we compare offenses to the 2011 year, this is why. Because this is what this offense was. We couldn't run the football, but we could throw it, and we threw it a ton. So, yeah, the weapons were off the charts. This was a crazy season. So the Lions did end up losing in the playoffs, 45-28. But and then all of a sudden, 2012, they would only win 4 games. And Jim Schwartz would later be fired. And then Jim Caldwell would come in his first year, 11-5. So we may compare those two at some point. But I want to tell you guys about the 2011 season. So let me hear your thoughts, comments below. If there's anything you remember specifically from the season, thank you, Prop, for watching, and I'm out.